Hello, thanks for watching. My name is Yuya Takeda. This is a video about my paper, Praxis of Critical Literacy, Pragmatic Utilization of Theoretical Tensions, which is published in an open access journal, Critical Education. The free access link to the paper is in the description, so please check it out. I wrote this paper and recording this video on the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I initially wrote this paper back in 2017. At that time, I was a first-year PhD student who was just entering the field of critical literacy, devouring the literature. As I was writing it, I was trying to make sense of the richness of the theoretical positions within the foundation of critical literacy. Although there seemed to be a consensus that the work of Paulo Freire is the central piece in critical literacy, many other philosophers and theorists are also discussed in the field. Ernest Morel, for example, claims that work of critical literacy has its roots in ancient Greek philosophers such as Socrates and Plato. In his book, we find a wide range of work from the Enlightenment, modern, postmodern, and postcolonial theorists, and even figures from pop culture discussed as constituting the foundation of critical literacy. So I started to wonder if critical literacy can be discussed as a theory. In contemporary social sciences, we are supposed to have a theoretical framework or theoretical orientations in our research. And I have seen critical literacy being utilized as a theoretical framework. But because of the rich theoretical roots in the foundation of critical literacy, it appeared to me that treating critical literacy as a unified theory is problematic because there are some tensions and contradictions between theories that constitute the foundation. So trying to make sense of how these contradictory theoretical positions can exist within critical literacy was the starting point of my project. As I continued reading, I came across a book chapter written by Alan Luke. In it, he stated that the theoretical tensions within the foundation are the central practical pivot for approaches to critical literacy. And this was an aha moment for me. Rather than trying to reconcile the theoretical tensions within the foundation, critical literacy utilizes these tensions. In other words, it is a praxis, a cyclical process of theorization, action, and reflection. And it is important to note that the kind of discussion I make in this paper is not new. Today, there are calls for post-humanist turn and affective turn of critical literacy. Both could be a major term for the field. However, the purpose of my conceptual paper is not to look upward for the incorporation of new theories, but downwards in order to solidify the foundation. For this, I juxtapose two major theoretical perspectives, the Marxist perspective and Foucauldian perspective, where I argue the biggest theoretical tensions lie. The important point is not to reconcile the contradictions, but to use the contradictions to generate productive energy for the critical literacy praxis. Okay? Let's see what Marxist and Ampharian approach to critical literacy looks like. Marxism is often described as dialectic materialism. It has its philosophical roots in the work of Hegel. Marx and his followers consider the progress of human thought and world as a dialectical progress. The contradiction between thesis and antithesis is overcome by reaching synthesis. For Hegel, history is a process in which the spirit attains higher form of consciousness. Marx and Engels appropriated Hegel's conceptual dialectic and turned it to analyze concrete material and economic conditions. Witnessing the pervasive material inequality and unfreedom of individuals in the capitalist society, Marx and Engels delineate the blueprint for revolution. The ruling class bourgeoisie is countered by the revolutionary class proletariat, which results in the communist revolution. The dialectical paradigm is clearly manifested in Freire's mode of thinking as well. Freire is concerned about the system of oppression, which is dehumanizing to both oppressor and oppressed. It is only through this antithetic work of the oppressed that emancipation, humanization of both oppressor and oppressed can be achieved. Another key aspect of Marxism is its conceptualization of ideology. In Marxism, ideology is considered as false consciousness, which conditions our perception of reality from a particular social class. Marx and Engels posit that the ruling class is not only the ruling material force, but also the ruling intellectual force. So the ruling class not only has power over material production and distribution, but also mental production. In other words, ideology is a limited frame of reality that functions to benefit the ruling class, and it is presented as common sense. For instance, idea of meritocracy, the idea that wealth is distributed according to skills and knowledge of individuals, is one form of manifestations of neoliberal ideology that serves the interests of those who hold power in this global capitalist society. Meritocracy conceals the systemic inequality based, for example, on race, gender, socioeconomic status, and produces an idea that success and failure depend on individual skills and efforts. So critique of ideology and awakening working class people from the false consciousness is an important task of Marxism. For this, the Freirean approach to critical literacy is indispensable. Freire considers the central task of education is conscientisation, roughly translated as critical consciousness raising. As it is well known, Freire problematizes what he calls the banking model of education, where teachers deposit knowledge and the students patiently receive, memorize, and repeat. This type of education not only benefits those who are in a position of power for their greater social control, but also dehumanizes the learners by treating them as mere containers and receptacles. Freire states, the more completely they accept the passive role imposed on them, the more they tend simply to adapt to the world as it is and to the fragmented view of reality deposited in them. In order to bring people into awareness about the system of oppression, Freire proposes the problem-posing education, in which teacher and students are positioned in a truly dialogical relationship as human subjects. Problem-posing education presents reality in process, in transformation, and students are invited to co-investigate and co-construct the reality. It is through participation in the co-construction of reality, Freire says, humankind emerge from their submersion and acquire the ability to intervene in reality as it is unveiled. Intervention in reality, historical awareness itself, thus presents a step forward from emergence and results from the conscientisation of the situation. Conscientisation is the deepening of the attitude of awareness characteristic of all emergence. While Marxists tackle reality and knowledge in a Hegelian dialectical approach, Foucault draws on Nietzschean genealogical approach. As discussed above, a Hegelian dialectic presupposes the idea of progress through the contestation between thesis and antithesis overcome by reaching the synthesis. Genealogy, on the contrary, does not treat history as stories of progress. Foucault, in his essay, Nietzsche, Genealogy, History, says the effective history provides discontinuity into our being. Foucault is against cohesive and polished historical narratives that claim to be objective and natural. Foucault states, genealogy does not pretend to go back in time to restore the unbroken continuity that operates beyond the dispersion of forgotten things. Its duty is not to demonstrate that the past actively exists in the present, that it continues secretly to animate the present, having imposed a predetermined form on all its vicissitudes. Genealogy does not resemble the evolution of the species and does not map the destiny of a people. Foucault resisted convergence, continuity, and conformity, and encouraged divergence, discontinuity, and transgression. His form of critical praxis manifests in his genealogical approach to the study of history. Foucault highlighted the fragments of ignored historical events in order to disrupt the continuous and cohesive historical narratives. Knowledge, for Foucault, is not made for understanding. It is made for cutting. Knowledge is produced by human subjects with a particular epistemological field, or the episteme of certain time and place. The episteme is a ground for knowledge production that is shaped by and through discourses. Discourse is defined as Ways of constituting knowledge, together with the social practices, forms of subjectivity and power relations which inhere in such knowledges and relations between them. Discourses are more than ways of thinking and producing meaning. They constitute the nature of the body, unconscious and conscious mind, and emotional life of the subjects they seek to govern. As this definition succinctly captures, discourses, in Foucauldian sense, not only structure and organize the meaning within society, but also constitute our conscious and unconscious ways of being as subjects. We, as human subjects, constitute discourses, but our subjectivities are constituted by discourses we inhabit. Crucial to Foucault's notion of discourse is the power relations that produce and are produced through discourses. Foucault's conceptualization of power differs from that of Marxists. The Marxist notion of power is tied to the material conditions, the ownership of property and mode of production, and ideology. From the Marxist perspective, power functions negatively through the dominant ideology, the false consciousness that makes and conceals the reality that is inconvenient for the ruling class. In this view, power is evil, and the goal of critical work is to dissolve it. On the contrary, Foucault conceptualizes power as positive, that power produces, makes, and shapes rather than masks, represses, and blocks. He argues that it is important to make distinctions between the power relations and state of domination. According to Foucault, power relations are mobile in a sense that they dynamically shift within social fields. States of domination exist where power relations are blocked or frozen by economic, political, or military means. So while the latter is certainly a situation we need to make efforts to avoid, the former is an inevitable condition for humans to live socially. Power, in the Foucauldian sense, is not something people possess as their own artifacts, but it is like energy that is generated and exercised within human relationships. It is through power relations that truth and knowledge are produced and distributed. With this positive notion of power, what is crucially important is that Foucault did not think liberation itself was sufficient for people to practice freedom. The notion of liberation, Foucault says, if it is not treated with precaution, runs the risk of falling back on the idea that there exists a human nature or base that, as a consequence of certain historical, economic, and social processes, has been concealed, alienated, or imprisoned in and by mechanisms of repression. Such a proposition leads to a false idea that simply by eliminating repressive deadlocks, people will be reconciled with themselves and re-establish a full and positive relationship with themselves. Freedom for Foucault is not the ultimate goal point people eventually arrive at, but rather it is an ongoing practice. The key for practice of freedom is what Foucault calls the care of the self. To know oneself is to know how power is exercised over oneself and redefine one's mode of life. In this sense, self-reflexivity is a key for practice of freedom. Now, I would like to turn to the discussion of how these two approaches propel the praxis of critical literacy. I do so by following the four key dimensions of the critical literacy identified Lewison, Flint, and Slice. 1. Disrupting the commonplace. 2. Interrogating multiple viewpoints. 3. Focusing on socio-political issues. And 4. Taking action and promoting social justice. First is disrupting the commonplace. From Marxist perspective, common sense is a product of ideology, and ideology reflects the worldview of the ruling class. The task of critical literacy here is to uncover the reality masked by ideology. Read the world through reading words and raise critical awareness about the oppressive reality to rename the world. For Foucault, common sense is a convention produced within a discourse. From this perspective, common sense is not false in a sense that they are opposed to reality, but are aspects of reality that have been constantly recollected and reenacted, thereby regularized within a discourse. Therefore, Foucauldian approach to the disruption of the commonplace is done not by presentation of truer version of reality, but by demonstration of different forms of knowledge and practice to expand the discourses to make more options available. These two orientations allow us to question the common sense differently. From Marxist perspective, we can ask who produces the common sense and who benefits from the common sense. From Foucauldian perspective, we may ask, how has the common sense been produced within the games of truth? How can we diverge from and transgress the common sense? Questions generated from each of these two theoretical perspectives are valuable, and depending on the issue, some of the questions may be more useful than the other ones. For instance, to confront the idea of meritocracy, Marxist orientation may help us to challenge the neoliberal ideology more effectively, since the ways in which such common sense function is to disguise the inequitable material distribution as a result of individual abilities and efforts. On the other hand, Foucauldian orientation may be more instrumental to dissolve the convention to make alternative ways of being possible. For example, by transgressing the traditional gender roles and behaviors, we can expand the boundaries of discourses and make different ways of being thinkable. From the Marxist point of view, the value of this dimension is to highlight the viewpoints of the oppressed. In this approach, the voices of the marginalized groups are intentionally privileged. The Foucauldian approach to this dimension is akin to his genealogical approach to history. Foucault highlighted various historical events that were often dismissed and forgotten for the sake of constructing cohesive and linear historical narratives of progress. In this dimension, Marxists may ask, how do the oppressed see the world? How can we raise the voices of the oppressed to counter the narratives of the oppressor? Foucauldians may ask, what stories have been omitted from the discourses? How can we bring about discontinuities to the cohesive historical narratives by introducing forgotten stories? The gaps between these two perspectives allow us to ask, whose stories are omitted from the dominant historical narrative? What kind of power relations make such omissions of stories possible? In what ways do such omissions of stories contribute to sustaining the existing power relations? It is safe to say that Marxist Freirean approach to critical literacy itself is the political act. Freire believes that the depoliticized subjects are dehumanized subjects. He stated, "For apart from inquiry, apart from the praxis, individuals cannot be truly human. Knowledge emerges only through invention and reinvention, through the restless, impatient, continuing, hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world, within the world, and with each other." For Freire, individuals do not automatically become a human, but they are humanized through actively participating in the creation of the world. In other words, being political is a human condition. Foucault is interested in how normative discourses were infiltrated into subjects so that they discipline themselves, which made the power ever more efficient for social control. In this sense, Foucauldian approach investigates sociopolitical issues by analyzing their manifestation on the level of subjectivity. In Foucault's approach, self-reflexivity is not simply an act of self-care, but by caring of the self, one can analyze how sociopolitical issues are manifested within themselves. Every question Marxists ask is political, and these questions can be enormous. How and by whom does the world represented in the text? And for whose interest does it function to serve? How can we rename the world in order to create more socially just society? On the other hand, the key questions Foucault poses are, who makes decisions for me? Who is preventing me from doing this and telling me to do that? Who is programming my movements and activities? Who is forcing me to live in a particular place when I work in another? How can these decisions on which my life is completely articulated taken? It is possible to think that these questions from the two theoretical perspectives can supplement each other for the understanding of sociopolitical issues. For example, by gaining the understanding of the self and how power relations are manifested within the self, asking bigger questions of how power relations function in a way to benefit certain group of people may become more accessible. Gaining the understanding of macro-level power relations in turn helps one to ask deeper questions about the self. The Marxist approach to social justice-oriented action is about confronting the material inequality and restoring the humanity by transforming the political and economic system of capitalism. Although the orientation is clear, Freire eagerly rejects the idea of prescriptively delineating what the action should look like. This is because he thinks every prescription represents the imposition of one individual's choice upon another, transforming the consciousness of the person prescribed to into one that conforms with the prescriber's consciousness. So any form of patronizing manipulations that undermine subject's conscious being is rejected. In this sense, the dialogue itself is a practice of freedom and the process of humanization. Through dialogue, people form solidarity and collectively work to rename the world. Although taking action is a crucial dimension of critical literacy, this is a great weakness of the Foucauldian approach, arising from Foucault's ironic stance toward the idea of progress and solidarity. When asked about his position on proposing a form of social action rather than presenting critique of existing structure, Foucault said, "My position is that it is not up to us to propose. As soon as one proposes a vocabulary, an ideology, which can only have effects of domination." Hence, the act of resistance and the practice of freedom for Foucault is about the care of the self and production of knowledge for divergence and discontinuity. This is the dimension where the differences between Marxist and Foucauldian approaches manifest most clearly. While Marxists strive to form solidarity for social change, Foucauldian's radical rejection of conformity does not allow them to form solidarity. Utilizing this tension, I propose to ask, how can we form solidarity and mobilize people for social change while remaining internally critical so that the conventionality is always challenged and conformity is rejected? Okay, let's recap. In this paper, I claim that critical literacy must be conceived as praxis rather than a unified theory, and made a case that theoretical tensions internal to the foundation can in fact be rendered generative to open up different ways of reading. To demonstrate this, I juxtaposed Marxist Freirean approach and Foucauldian approach to critical literacy, and explored the questions that emerge from the dialectic between the two. While the former debunks ideologies and enables solidarity among the oppressed for the emancipatory struggle, the latter inserts discontinuities into narratives and promotes transgression against the disciplinary power. The tensions between consolidation and dissolution, narrativization and fragmentation, association with and dissociation from identities are the pivot for propelling the praxis of critical literacy. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the comment section below. Thank you.